Hello, a beautiful sunny day here in Morgantown during the heat wave that we are experiencing here in the summer. Hope everyone is doing well. I decided to combine these two chapters for today's podcast because they definitely overlap. And when I teach this in a regular class, in a lecture class, I usually teach both of these chapters in a 1 week period. The principles of group and team dynamics are not well understood by most of the coaches that I've interacted with. Although they do a lot of these principles, they wouldn't necessarily understand why, which is common. They were taught certain ways from their previous coaches, and sometimes coaches are excellent at making sure there are good team dynamics and they build great cohesion in their teams, and other times coaches do not do a real good job of that. So we want to understand, well, what are some of the factors that influence the dynamics within groups? And I can tell you from working with sports psychology for 15 years now, it's a lot more complicated to work with a team than it is with an individual. Because an individual, it's a very focused consultation. It's about the issues related to that specific person, and you can typically target and identify a lot of things that you can control and modify, particularly self-talk, other behavioral strategies, how to build intrinsic motivation, and the techniques, of course, are individually tailored. But in a team situation, it's a far more complex and interesting dynamic. To work and deal with the team climate and issues that arise on a team require a significantly higher level of skill from a sports psychologist and from a coach than would working with individual coaching or individual sports psych consultations. So let's have a look at some of the issues that we'll deal with. The first is a key definition of a group from social psychology. You may have gotten this from your 271 lectures as well. It is at least two people, and they have some sort of shared characteristics. They are some form of collective identity, and this could be as simple as a group project in a class. Okay, that is the purpose of that group. Identifying distinctive roles within that team, and that could, of course, be starting players, the starting fullback, the starting sweeper on a soccer team, the starting quarterback, the backup, the team captain. There are fairly structured modes of communication. How are we going to communicate? We show up at practice at 3 p.m. at the indoor practice facility at WVU. I lead that as the coach. You listen, you follow, whatever it is the structure is. And then there are norms for behavior, and those norms are communicated from previous athletes and from coaches, and we'll get into what all of those are. So if you're a group, there has to be some sort of shared characteristics similar to these. There are 3 different perspectives discussed in your book related to how groups form. I'm only going to cover one in depth because it's the one that's been most useful to me in my work with in teams, and that's the linear perspective. I don't think it always goes this way, the linear perspective, but it's a really easy one to remember because the stages go, and they all rhyme. So the stages go: forming, storming, norming, and performing. So in the forming stage, you can imagine a typical preseason situation. You get to know everybody. You're getting familiar with, hey, is there a new coach, a new assistant coach, new team, new freshman coming on the team? And the structure starts to develop. So it's a very informal, collegial, cooperative type of stage. You're getting to know everybody. You're friendly. There's not a lot of conflict. And the key things that need to happen at this stage before a team can move to storming, which is a much more conflicting stage, is we need to build relationships and get to know each other. So the activities should focus on getting to know who your teammates are, what they do, and what their personalities are, what their strengths and weaknesses are, what kind of previous experiences they've had, getting to know the coaches, the training staff. So anything that's going to familiarize and make us seem like a team before we move into basically battle under the storming phase would be very helpful so that we can survive the next stage. So the next stage is really battle for position within the team. There's a lot more interpersonal conflict. There's rebellion against the training staff, the coaches, and there's an attempt by the team to exert some sort of control over what's going to happen. Now, this process must occur for roles to emerge and for leaders to emerge and for the team then to build a structure that's most effective. Because you can imagine if there's no competition and coach just says, okay, you 5 are the starting 5 players on the basketball team, and you 7 are the ones that are going to sit without any sort of battle for competition or assessment of individual abilities, then that's not going to be a very effective group. It's going to be a bad season, that's for sure. But if this stage is not completed ahead of time, that's not going to go well either. So each stage has critical pieces that must occur. Here, there needs to be fairness. There needs to be competitions that are open, that allow people to compete for those positions. And there needs to be opportunities for people to exert leadership. As you move into a calmer stage, now we begin to cooperate again. We've had an opportunity to fight it out. We've kind of accepted, and this is where roles are developed. And I'm going to talk more specifically in a couple minutes about the different types of roles and the ones that are very important. So there are informal roles, there's formal roles, and it's a matter of whether or not you accept that role or not, and how much commitment are you putting into your role as the backup goalkeeper. Are you working hard? Are you ready to go on a moment's notice, for example? Here's where we actually form the norms of how we're going to function this season. It's different every season. It has to go. You have to do it every single year. And there's a calming of the water. So in the storming stage, the waters are choppy. It's a battle. Then there's norming. Okay, then that still is not enough for a team to perform well. You actually then have to put forth the effort and have a goal that's shared in order to reach a high level of performing. So if you've got your roles in place, people are committed to their roles, and this is where role commitment comes in, and everyone's on the same page and willing to work towards a shared goal in their respective role and get better every day. So if you have a task, a mastery climate, you're reinforcing the appropriate things, and you can take your team from norming into a performing zone. As I mentioned before, there are formal roles dictated through the organization, and then there are informal roles that emerge that are still critical within particular sports that you have to have, but I've seen this go a lot of different ways in terms of how captains are appointed. There don't have to be captains on a team. This is a traditional thing that some teams have, some teams don't. But some coaches will allow leaders to emerge and then appoint them as the team captains. Others will pick their chosen, children there, and then they will put them forth as the captain. And they're sometimes emerged as, sometimes supported by the team as the captain, sometimes not. More often than not, the coaches appoint who they want, and then there are other people that also emerge that exhibit informal leadership roles anyway. So both formal and informal roles are part of the group structure. But as I mentioned before, the clarity of your role and whether or not you accept that role are critical pieces of the group structure. And if you imagine a simpler context of maybe you guys working on a group project, have you ever really talked about, okay, who's going to be the one that types up and does the editing to the paper? Who's going to be the one who's the most comfortable presenting? Who's going to be the proofreader and double check everything? Who's going to go to the literature and find the research and make sure we have the evidence? Did you guys talk at all about who's going to do what? It's not really efficient for everyone to do the same things. So you should definitely think about, who's going to do that? And am I competent to do that? Do I have the right ability? Am I motivated to do that part? And so is there overlap, though, of everyone trying to be the captain, the leader? And that was not be a very inefficient. And basically, in that point, you stay in storming. You never move into norming. So these things, role clarity, accepting your role, and then everyone, of course, being able to execute their role are critical to getting to norming. And then role commitment, the effort that people are putting into their roles, will dictate whether people move into a performance zone out of that. Norms are critical, and they're very important because without any effort from the coach or the leader, they will allow behavior to be reinforced. It's a perception. Okay, a norm ultimately is a perception about how hard am I supposed to work in this group, in this team, what am I supposed to think about, and the leaders on the team, including the athletes and the coaches, establish these things from year to year to year. So seniors pass down their traditions. This is how we do it here at WVU lacrosse or WVU rowing, etc. This is how we behave. This is the expectations for practice. Here's how we compete. And so there becomes a culture. The norms form the culture of the team that lets you know this is an acceptable behavior when you're wearing this uniform. This is not an acceptable behavior. And these are typically translated through messages on locker room walls, through preseason speeches and activities, and through how coaches interact with athletes in practice and competitions. So they're very important to establish because they allow the behaviors to be reinforced in a natural way by the team. And if someone behaves outside of the norm, typically the group will bring that person back. Okay, so part of creating a climate is the norm, and then also additionally is building social support within the unit itself so that the leader doesn't have to constantly be providing that. So there's a cooperative issue, there's support in terms of injury or stress, and there's a communication flow that goes on that allows big problems to be prevented, and for athletes to feel like, hey, we're in this together and we can handle whatever's thrown at us. Let's go after it. And you can see, if any of you watched a lot of basketball or soccer, a lot of real team-focused sports, if there's not a good climate within that team, and we're going to talk about forms of cohesion and support amongst teammates, then the team basically just falls apart and does not have the ability to undermine stress. Whereas if there are good relationships and trust and respect across positions in the team, then when that team, that group is put under stress, then they'll actually hold up. But if they're not solid, they don't have a solid foundation to their house, they will not hold up. Some of the principles that are easy to build in to help people feel like, hey, I'm a part of this group, we're in this together, and there are things that almost all teams and sororities and groups do, proximity and distinctness are two of the most critical principles. So you got to have people together, and of course in preseason, that's why teams spend 5, 6, 7, 8 hours together. They eat together, they get trained together, get hammered on by strength and conditioning together, they travel together, in some cases they live together. So that proximity allows more opportunity for interaction and getting to know each other, and so it really supports that forming process. Now, distinctiveness would be, you're showing up wearing particular gear. We are looking different than another team, than another group, and that distinctiveness, and it could be something as simple as wearing the same T-shirts each day or the same training gear, is going to support the fact that I'm a member of this team, we're together, we're a unit, and you're like me, we're in this together. So some coaches that are super anal and say, we're wearing these warm-ups and this show up at the bus at this time and everyone's looking the same, that just promotes the idea that we're a distinctive group, and when we're put into a context where we need to compete, we're likely to be able to stay together then. Other factors are fairness and similarity, and this is similarity of attitudes and ability levels in particular, as you'll see that coming out of cohesion. Fairness and treatment of people will promote an effective team climate. However, if coaches are very uneven and there are 2 or 3 favored sons or daughters on the team, then that will not create a positive group climate and not encourage people to work hard who are not part of that subgroup. So cliques, of course, break up that effective team climate and will prevent that team from achieving a higher level of performance. Greater similarity in attitudes, values, goals, and even ability level, so a team with even ability level will result in a closer climate on that team and generally result in more of a satisfaction from the team. As I mentioned before, the individual ability, you've seen this a lot in recent years, that in a lot of cases in pro sports, it's not necessarily the team with the best athlete. The Cleveland Cavaliers and LeBron James, for example, have not won the last couple years, even though in the regular season they have performed very well. So in this case, you have teams with closer even ability are more likely to play the best. So if you imagine you had a team of all players rated B or B+, even, it doesn't matter really what type of team, they will be more likely to perform well if you had an A player, a C player, a D player, another F player, and a B player. because they're going to find a way to function together and use their skill sets more effectively across the task. Now, there's a couple of social psych terms that you may have gotten from 272, and so this could be a repeat, but they're useful to understand how groups function, and they're fairly simple principles. So the larger the group, this is the Ringelmann effect, you're going to see a decrease in individual performance. And so there are different strategies you need to promote to make sure that individuals can't loaf, socially loaf, which we'll look at as the next principle. So that's why, like, if I'm going to form groups in my class, I'd rather have you work in pairs than in a group of 4. Because in a group of 2, you're forced to put forth more effort, take on more tasks, be held more accountable than if I put you in a group of 4 or 6 or 8. So larger groups like that for group projects tend to be much more ineffective than smaller groups, because you're not forced to put forth individual effort. Now, the same principle here really is social loafing, is that you can see people in larger groups particularly put forth less than 100% effort due to motivational losses, because basically they're not able to be identified. So in a larger group or a team project, let's say of 5 or 6 people working on a paper, and you're going to get 1 grade, then it's easy to some degree for some student to socially loaf. So you have to then take strategies to identify, the effort levels of each individual to hold them accountable to prevent social loafing, because you know that this Ringelmann effect exists when you go to larger groups. Okay, so particularly with larger groups, Ringelmann effect, social loafing can exist when it's not an individual task. So if I graded each individual, for example, in a class on their own performance in a presentation, all individual, of course, everybody's being held accountable by their individual performance. But if I instead grade just the group and I give no measure of individual performance, then there's the social loafing effect. Well, someone else will pick it up. I don't need to put in 100%. So one way we would commonly do that is have teammates evaluate each other so that there's still an individual level of accountability in each group. And so you'll even see that, like on a football team, there might be a linebacking coach. They might work as a unit, but they'll get individual performance reports, or they'll get individual video analysis to hold them accountable. And those strategies are basically set up to prevent social loafing in a group context. Now, switching to the next chapter, and then is really these concepts all fit together, is cohesion. Cohesion was by a bunch of Canadian guys, really worked on this out of the University of Western Ontario. And there's an absolute enormous amount of research on cohesion in sport. So you do need to be familiar with the different definitions of cohesion, the different types of cohesion, and in general, the theory of cohesion that I'll go over in just a couple moments. So cohesion itself is the tendency for a group to stick together in pursuit of its joint goals. So to be cohesive, holding together, to stick together, is the likelihood of a team to stay together, to compete together, to be socially together, and it has 2 key elements. And those key elements are task and social cohesion. They're totally different. The task cohesion has to do with the objectives of the group, whatever the shared purposes are. So on a sport team, let's take lacrosse. The task cohesion is how well do they actually communicate and play and function as a cohesive lacrosse unit to defend and to score goals. That's task cohesion. Social cohesion would be how well do they get along off the field and support each other on tasks that are unrelated to competing or training or getting better at lacrosse. So there's 2 separate elements. Task cohesion, in a lot of the classic earlier research, is highly associated with better performance on teams, and social cohesion was not in some of the classic research. However, newer research has suggested that both task and social cohesion are related to higher levels of performance on a team. Now, I'm going to see if I can get this model to be a little bit larger so we can look at each of the pieces, and so it just might take me a moment to get this squared away here. Let's get this in here. Okay, let's go down and whoops, sorry about that. Okay, here we go. So at the top of the model, you've got just the environmental factors that are affecting the context. And this could be like, in each professional organization you have different types of leadership, general managers and athletic directors and all these people at the top of the picture, and then what are people being asked to do in their contracts. Student athletes putting forth a certain amount of hours, and professional athletes, what are the expectations in that context. So this is really just the context in which you're observing the team. And then you can see here you have kind of the social situational factors specific to that sport environment, and that is the coach's leadership behavior, the style, the personalities, and the interaction. This really should be the coach-athlete relationships, not their personalities. And then you have the individual factors here, and what are the athletes focused on? Are they me first? Are they team first? Do they like the environment? And then any sort of individual differences in their achievement motivation and any other factors there related to their own needs and their motivation. Okay, so all of those things lead into, most specific than the team factors on this team this season. So as I mentioned before, every team is different. Even if you're a freshman to a sophomore to a junior to a senior, each team, each season is different. It should be treated differently because personalities change, individual skill levels change, motivations change over time, everything changes, physical abilities. And so what's the task this year? What's the motivation of the group to do well? What's the norm for how hard we're going to work? I mean, are we all trying to get A's on this assignment? Are we satisfied with B's? Do we even care about this class? And so don't make assumptions that on every team that they just want to win and they want to, be all-stars. That's really not the case. You do have to have some assessment here of how good are your individual athletes, what's the ability of the team, and then what's the turnover, because the higher the turnover of talent, the more difficult it is to have a cohesive unit. And then those things will predict initially the task and social cohesion on that particular team. Now, the higher levels of task and social cohesion will therefore improve the likelihood that people stay on that team. Does the team get better? That would be the relative performance, and then overall levels of performance. So definitely a good relationship here between the team staying together, between the cohesion and team staying together and their performance. And then also some individual outcomes. Are teams getting better? And in particular, in my experience, satisfaction with the experience. If a team is cohesive and they have good relationships and feel supportive, even if there's not performance, the athletes really can enjoy that experience. I can think of a team situation when I was in high school. I played tennis and golf in high school, and we had a great time and had great relationships with my teammates on both of those teams, but we weren't particularly successful. We didn't win state championships or anything of that nature. When I look back on those experiences, I think of them as very positive team experiences, even though the performance was not high. We did well. We did okay. I'd give us a B minus in terms of our level of performance. We weren't that good. We didn't have the greatest athletes on our teams, but we had really a lot of fun. I had great social cohesion. So the satisfaction with those and my likelihood to compete and stay in that sport and enjoy that sport, which would be a behavior consequence, was actually quite high. And so those are a couple examples of how cohesion, first of all, can be put together and built, and then also how it influences some of the key outcomes in sport. Let me just resize this real quickly. Get back down to our and get you squared away. Okay. Hey, what happened there? Sorry about that. Having some difficulties with my PowerPoint. Yeah, I think we're back. Sorry for the delay there. Okay, let's go ahead and move on it. There's a lot of information in your chapter on the group environment questionnaire, which is a survey measure that these colleagues in Canada have used to measure task and social cohesion. I'm not a huge fan of that survey. So I wouldn't spend too much time reading the information on the group environment questionnaire, but it is the most commonly used method to measure cohesion in teams. This particular technique, called a sociogram, is for me a little bit more interesting and visually appealing to athletes. So basically what you do is you put the name on each of the athletes' hats or soccer balls or whatever you're working with, and you try to draw it out to show the distance and the connection. So although this one just has attraction and rejection, showing who has good relationships, like this person likes Tom but Tom doesn't like Larry, you can do this in a variety of ways, just purely in terms of the strength of the relationship. You can also identify cliques. So maybe, for example, this is a really nice clique here, but for whatever reason Bill doesn't get connected here at all with any of these folks. So you can show by visual space where the cliques are and who is helping, hurting the cohesion. So this sociogram is a very interesting and simple and visually appealing way to show to a team, here's what's happening on your team. And I've used this in team contacts with coaches and with athletes, and it can be very helpful just to see it on paper. It makes a very abstract concept of cohesion something that is visually concrete and easy to look at, and then we might be able to move pieces around, and it helps us identify what strategies we might need to develop and intervention strategies to get there. There is a fairly strong relationship both ways between cohesion and performance. So the more cohesive a team, the better they'll perform, and then the better they perform, that's basically a form of reinforcement that brings back to the team that makes them more cohesive as a unit. So it's a circular relationship between cohesion and performance. Kind of important to understand. The last approach I'm going to talk about, and there are some other guidelines for building cohesion you're going to want to review from your textbook, but I kind of like this just because it's a simple approach to building your teams, called the MAPS approach. And this is an approach we use fairly commonly here at WVU to build WVU teams and to also build teams within youth and other areas, other colleges that we work with. One of the first things is really to help the team identify a mission, a culture that they want to live by. And this should come from the coaches and the team. Is to clarify, what are we about here? Are we a team that's about fun? Are we a team that really just wants to do okay? Or are we a really ultra competitive team that's trying to compete for championships and we're more focused on outcomes? So that let the culture get created first so that we know the context in which we're trying to ask people to compete or work. And you should do that with any groups that you get put on or put together on. Like, what are you really about? How do you want to function here? The assessment phase is very, very important. So in this case, you have to figure out, well, what kind of a team do we have? What type of talent do we have? What are the strengths? What are the areas we're lacking? And you have to do that through observation, through survey, through talking with coaches, through talking with athletes, through having sessions where, in the forming and storming stages, you're able to evaluate all that and then to determine what are the areas we need to focus on. So then that helps you develop your plan, which is your action plans to increase the likelihood that people are going to put forth effort and commitment. And that involves a lot of, identifying roles, making goals that work, developing punishments and reinforcements that are effective so that the team is functioning in an efficient way and everyone's committed to that. And then the evaluation piece, which is just as important to goals, is to, on a regular basis, maybe every week to 2 weeks, no more than that, to review and revise the goals and plans that you've made so you can constantly hold yourself accountable to the objectives and the mission. So you're always returning back to the mission, and then there might be underneath that mission this season's goals or what we're trying to achieve. Like last year we got to third place and we're really motivated to get into the top 2 and to compete for a conference championship or whatever it might be. So the mission is general and stays with the team forever and builds the culture. And then there needs to be in each season more of a specific yearly assessment and then plans that will build that in for that particular year. So overall, with team building and team cohesion, it needs to be a proactive, yearly, involved process. Otherwise, you're just leaving it up to chance. Because sometimes teams, if you just did nothing and did your normal thing as a coach and didn't really help them get to know each other, then it could occur. You might get lucky every now and then because maybe there are really good friends coming on the team. And a really good example of this in a movie, if you've ever watched Remember the Titans, where Denzel Washington is the football coach, and you watch what they had to do at training camp, and they had to integrate together, and these guys hated each other, and they had to learn everybody's name and know what they're about. It's a really good example of a mission, delivering effective messages, and particularly the forming and storming and norming stages are really exhibited well in that movie. So you want to go back and check that movie out. It's a really good example of some of these principles of how you build a team. And the really great teams will have gone through some of these stages and processes in a very explicit way. They don't just let it happen to them. The principles are built into how someone coaches, and then the practices, and then the competitions, and all of that stuff are built in. So if you take a very structured and theory-based way, you're likely to find a good path for your team. I hope you have a little bit better understanding of the team dynamics process, and I hope you do well on the exam for the next unit. Enjoy the rest of your day.